I think I have loved Jake since we were kids. We were next-door neighbors and constant playmates. It was the most natural thing that we became best friends. Jake lived with his grandparents. He was always over my house. I think he enjoyed being part of a normal family. So I made him play with doll houses with me. He taught me how to play baseball. We rode our bikes and flew kites. We played princess and monsters. Jake was always my knight in shining armor. We played in sandboxes, playgrounds, and even did our homework together. Jake and I were inseparable. When we got to junior high, we were each other's dates. It was easier that way. We were always together anyway. I didn't have to worry if I was pretty enough to be asked by other guys. Jake didn't have to be nervous about asking another girl. We did a lot of crazy things together. Once, when we were 10 years old, Jake dared me to drink some of his dad's brandy. It tasted awful. I threw up right after and got a terrible headache the next day. Jake teased me a lot about puking, so I just pretended that I didn't remember anything that happened. That's how we were, always joking and teasing. Since we were always together, we just both assumed that we would always be there for each other, no matter what. We got teased a lot, especially by our families. They called us Mr. and Mrs. We just shrugged it off. Besides, I didn't think it was so bad if I ended up marrying Jake when we got older. It would be great to marry my best friend. When I would think about it, I always pictured myself at a wedding with me walking down the aisle with my hand on Jake's arm. It was like it was foretold. I already met my soulmate when I was just 4 years old. Do you want to meet and marry your soulmate too? Click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to leave a great comment below. But as we got older, things began to change. I guess it's only natural that Jake started hanging out with other boys. I had other girlfriends too. But my best friend was always going to be Jake. Nothing was ever going to change that. One day, Jake went over to my house and brought a new friend along. "Hey, Sarah," he said, "this is Gilbert." When I looked at Gilbert, my heart totally stopped. He was the most handsome boy I had ever seen. When the sun hit the top of his head, his golden hair shone like a halo. I felt like I was looking at an angel. "Hi, Sarah," Gilbert said. He shook my hand and I felt the electricity pass between us. Jake asked me if they could hang out with me that day. Of course, I said yes. Gilbert turned out to be a great guy. It even helped that he looked like a model, too. He was funny and he was a good listener. He always smiled when Jake and I got into our arguments. I have to admit that I developed a little crush on Gilbert. How could I not? He was so handsome and kind. So, for months on end, it became the three of us. We watched movies together, we had silly picnics in the park. The summer before we all left for college, our parents agreed that we could all take a trip with just the three of us. So we went to the beach house of Gilbert's family and stayed overnight. After dinner, Gilbert brought out some drinks. We giggled and laughed a lot, knowing that we weren't old enough to drink yet. But we did it anyway. I wasn't used to drinking, and I got drunk really fast. The next thing I knew, I was on the couch cuddling with Gilbert. "You're so handsome," I told him while I stroked his cheek. I could see that Gilbert was getting uncomfortable. "Sarah, I think you've had enough to drink," he told me. He tried to push my hand away, but I refused, and instead I did the most aggressive thing I have ever done in my life. I kissed Gilbert full on the lips. I didn't know if it was his first kiss, but it was definitely mine. I only stopped kissing Gilbert when I heard the sound of something breaking. When I looked up, I saw Jake looking at us with a shocked look on his face. Somehow, that look brought me to my senses. I blushed, stood up, and apologized. "Sorry, I think I've had enough to drink," I told the boys. I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in. I splashed some water on my face to clear my head. I felt so guilty about doing something like that, especially in front of Jake. When I remembered his face, I remember seeing anger, disbelief, and a little bit of disgust. I knew I loved Jake, but was I in love with him? Should I have kissed him instead? It was a huge mistake to kiss Gilbert, but he was just so handsome. Is this how it felt, loving two different people at the same time? I felt so confused, and I totally dreaded facing the two of them again the next morning. During breakfast the next day, Gilbert tried to talk to me. "Sarah, about last night," he started to say. But Jake butted in. "She doesn't remember," he said. "When we drank some of my dad's brandy when we were 10 years old, Sarah did a lot of silly things, but she forgot all about them the next day." Although I remember kissing Gilbert, I decided to play along. I lied and said I didn't remember doing anything the night before. It was just easier to pretend that nothing happened. That memorable evening was the last one we had in a long time. I was off to a different college than the two boys. I knew I would only see them during the holidays. I was going to miss being with Jake all the time. But it wasn't all that bad. We were still texting and calling each other a lot. I was glad to hear that Jake was still hanging out with Gilbert. I was bummed to hear that neither of them were coming back home for Christmas or spring break. Jake said that they had a lot of things planned with the boys. I just reminded him to be good and not to kiss random girls. "You're the random kisser," he teased me. It was a good thing that he couldn't see my face because I still remember that awkward night. So I didn't see the boys until the next summer. On my first day back, I heard a frantic knock on my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed quickly and opened the door. Jake was standing there, all tanned and smiling. I hugged him fiercely. Then I felt another pair of arms around us. It was Gilbert. It was a nice three-way hug from a group of old friends. That summer almost felt like we were never apart. We spent every day together, just trying to catch up on missed time. I felt a little jealous of some of the things Jake and Gilbert did without me. It sounded like they had a lot of fun in their college. "What about you, Sarah?" Gilbert asked. "Break any hearts in that fancy college of yours?" I laughed a little too loudly and shook my head. Now that Jake was here, I realized that he was the reason why I never fell for anyone in college. No one understood me like Jake did. I looked at him and knew that he felt exactly the same way. It was a surprise when he asked Gilbert to go home early that day. "I've got to talk to Sarah for a bit," he explained to Gilbert. Gilbert nodded and left. Jake asked me to go for a walk. I was feeling kind of excited and nervous. What was he going to say? Was he finally going to let me know that he felt something between us? Were we finally finalizing that we were an item now? So we took a walk in the park. We sat down on a bench and he held my hand. "There's something I want to tell you, Sarah," he began with all seriousness. I thought to myself, this is it. It doesn't matter to him that I kissed Gilbert last year. He knows that I was just drunk. He's going to tell me that he loves me too. "I love you, Sarah," he said. I beamed. "I've loved you from when we were kids. I've wanted to tell you something for a long time. I know that you'll understand. Sarah, I'm gay." What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How can Jake be gay? I mean, he just told me that he loved me. Then he said something else that was totally unbelievable. He said that he was in love with Gilbert, and Gilbert felt the same way about him. I just sat there and stared at Jake. Of all the things he could have told me that day, this was the last thing that I expected. I reminded him that he was upset when I kissed Gilbert. All this time, I thought he was jealous because he was in love with me. Then Jake laughed. "I knew you were just pretending that you forgot about that night," he said. "I was trying to save your dignity. I also know that you kissed Gilbert because he's so handsome. I thought that was the reason I fell for him too, but it's not just his looks. You know how Gilbert is. He's so great." Damn, Jake. He knew me too well. But there was something he knew nothing about. He didn't know that I was in love with him. He kept talking about wanting his own family. He never felt like he was complete because he never knew his own parents. He was scared to come out to other people, especially to his grandparents. He kept asking me if I understood and if I was still his best friend. I couldn't reply. My heart felt like it was being crushed in my chest. So I stood up and left. It was just too humiliating. I didn't see either Jake or Gilbert again that summer. It was a relief when it was finally time to go back to school. I went through a dating craze when I went back to college, and I rarely went home. I didn't want to see anyone from my past. It was probably all over town by now. Everybody probably knew that Jake was gay. I couldn't face everyone feeling sorry for me. So I dated as many boys as I could. I needed to prove to myself that men could fall in love with me. I needed to prove to myself that I didn't need Jake's love. So I ended up dating Wesley, and he became my boyfriend. Then, one day, I was pregnant. There was no other place to go but home. I packed my bags and went home in tears. My life was such a mess. Wesley was just as shocked as I was. He didn't want to be a father, just like I didn't want to become a mom. Not yet, anyway. I was too young. I wanted to get married to a great guy first and have a honeymoon. I wanted a career. I didn't want to be bogged down with a child. I wasn't ready. I don't know who called him, but suddenly, Jake was back home with me too. He knew I was going through a hard time. We both cried a lot together. I feel so alone, I told him. But Jake told me something that completely opened up my mind. I felt alone for a long time too. It's not easy being gay in this town. I know people are judging me. I had hoped for your support when I came out. Then the gravity of what I did suddenly dawned on me. I kept saying that Jake and I were best friends, but I left when he needed me most. It's okay, Sarah, he said. I knew it was a shock. He told me that he loved me. He told me that being gay wasn't going to change the fact that I would always be his best friend. Then he told me that having a baby was one of the best things that could happen to anyone. I don't want this baby, Jake, I replied. You can't mean that you want an abortion, Jake asked me with an angry voice. You can't do that. I sobbed and I nodded. I knew I could never do that. But what else were my options? You can do this. I'll be with you the whole time. You won't be alone, he said. This baby is going to be so loved by everyone. He begged me not to give the baby away. He reminded me that he grew up without parents. I nodded and agreed. I could be a mother to this baby if I wanted to. After a couple of weeks, I started to feel better with Jake by my side. He was my rock. I got my strength from him. Then one day, he told me some more news. He and Gilbert decided to get married. I must have cried buckets of tears that day. I was so happy for him. I knew I could never have Jake. Even if I had deserted him in the past, he was still there for me. I was happy that he was happy. Somehow, the thought of Jake and Gilbert stopped tormenting me. I loved them both very much, and I finally decided that there was no room for jealousy if I loved someone. Jake would always be my first love, and if I loved him enough, I would be happy for him too. They decided to get hitched a few months before I gave birth. Jake asked me to walk him down the aisle. His grandparents didn't approve of their marriage, but I was going to make sure that their wedding was going to be full of love and support. It felt like the most natural thing. I saw this happen in my head when I was just a child. I was wearing a lovely dress, and Jake wore a tuxedo. Gilbert was waiting for us. It broke my heart a little to let Jake go, but if I was going to lose him to someone, it was good that I was going to give him to a good person like Gilbert. They never even left for a honeymoon. My 2 boys stayed with me during the whole pregnancy. You're so lucky, Sarah, Gilbert said. As much as I want to be a father, I guess I'll just settle for being your baby's favorite uncle. Hell no, Jake cried. I'm gonna be this baby's favorite person. It warmed my heart to hear them that way. The baby wasn't here yet, and already they were becoming fathers. As usual, Gilbert agreed to give me anything that I wanted. It was great. It was like having 2 husbands that were super supportive. They took care of me. They held my hair back when I threw up. They rubbed lotion on my growing belly so I wouldn't get stretch marks. They even went out in the middle of the night when I wanted to eat some pickles. When I went into labor, I was brave enough to endure the pain. I was going to give this baby the best life it could ever have. So I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I waited to feel my motherly instincts kick in. I looked at my baby and wondered if I could do the thing that I knew I had to do. When Jake and Gilbert arrived to visit, I saw them hold the baby in their arms. They looked like a perfect family. I'm finally giving you a wedding gift. Sorry it took so long, I told my boys. You're holding her in your arms. Then I handed Gilbert a stack of papers. It was for my baby's adoption. I was giving up my rights as a mother. I was giving them my baby. Of all the years I've known Jake, I've never seen him cry until that day. And I never really realized just how much I loved him. I loved all 3 of them. I was giving my baby to the best parents in the world.